Welcome back to the newsroom here on France 24. We're going to be taking a look through all the top headlines of the day in the French newspapers now with our newspaper reviewer, Kyle Brown, who's here in the studio with me. Hi there, Kyle.
Good morning.
We're going to be starting off with a look at one of the communities that faces a lot of difficulties here in France, the Roma.
That's right. Local communities of the Roma, they're being moved about. You can see here on the front page of Liberace, there's a feature on them. A community of about 200, mostly children, and they have just been moved on from a previous site where there was a big fire. No explanation of how that happened, but a kind of a glimpse into the life of the Roma and how it's getting tough in spite of a new government. You know, the Interior Minister Manuel Valls, he was expected to have a more moderate line than his predecessor in the previous government, but instead he announced last month that, you know, they would indeed execute the evictions ordered by the courts, but with an eye to doing so with the local governments and with community organizations. Libération is saying not a bit of it. It's not happened. In fact, L'Humanité actually goes on to say, they cover the same story, and they're saying that actually they've had to flee into the woods, they've had to go to train stations, and they've had to, and the problems resume all over again. So in fact, it's not been a more temporized measure. Instead, it's being a bit chaotic, and the problems haven't been resolved, even though the new government pledged new solutions.
Yeah, the people perhaps just moved on to new locations. You do see quite a lot around Paris, certainly. Well, also in Libération, looking at an international story in that paper, these attacks on military barracks in Ivory Coast in the last few days.
Yes, here we have a Q&A with a political analyst who talks about why these attacks took place. And he said that the forces loyal to former President Laurent Gbagbo have conducted a number of revenge attacks, the last one obviously leading to the deaths of several soldiers. Now, this all stems from the unresolved conflict between the two sides. The former president's loyalists who remain in various parts of Côte d'Ivoire, of Ivory Coast, and on the one hand, and Alassane Ouattara, whose forces are obviously still trying to keep some kind of peace. But there's not been any reconciliation, the analyst says. So throughout the last several months, in fact, there have been pot shots taken at soldiers and no real demobilization that was promised. The resources haven't been put in properly, and the analyst said it's likely to continue for some time to come.
OK, well, staying in Africa then, a story about the Islamic fundamentalists in the north of Mali that we've been talking about in the news, and their attempts to impose Sharia law in that large part of Mali that they've taken over.
That's right. This is in the northeast of the country, and the jihadist group announced that it would conduct a sentence in line with Sharia law. They were supposed to cut the hand off of a man who had been accused of theft. Instead, what the local community said in this area, it's not going to happen. They occupied the square where it was supposed to happen publicly, and they blocked them from gaining any access. They blocked the authorities from gaining access, and so it didn't take place. And what happened instead was a number of journalists were beaten, and then another series of protests erupted. So quite clear that militarily they're in charge, but they don't have the hearts and minds of the people just yet.
OK, very interesting stuff. Of course, very hard for journalists to get into and out of those kinds of regions at the moment. So interesting to see that story coming up in the French papers. Thanks very much, Kyle Brown, with our look through the day's top stories in the French newspapers.